Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to today's webinar, DevExtreme Evolution from Native to Hybrid, presented by DevExpress Technical Evangelist Paul Usher. In this webinar, you'll see how easy it is to create a single code base targeting iOS, Android, and Windows Phone, how Typescript allows seasoned .NET developers to embark to the world of JavaScript with confidence, how DevExtreme and Visual Studio provide easy-to-use tools for UI design, and how to create provisioning profiles and prepare for an app submission. Thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Paul Usher.
Thanks, Amanda, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to DevExtreme Evolution from Native to Hybrid. Now, what do I actually mean by natural evolution? Well, I've spoken with a number of developers who've built native applications and want to harness the growing number of users on other platforms. And by native, I'm talking about things such as an app that's specifically for an OS such as iOS or specifically for Android. The natural evolution part is where they've realized that the user base upon other operating systems is growing dramatically, and it would be really good to be able to target that application into those arenas. So today we're going to take a look at a little utility program that was created in iOS and build it out using DevExtreme. Now, this steps us into a couple of different things. If you think about the fact that a native application, in our case it's been written in Objective-C, we want to target those other markets. We want to be able to say, what do we need to do and what steps are involved to build a hybrid application and what's it all about. There's no requirement to understand Objective-C. We're not going to be jumping in and studying any of the code in depth from that point of view. We're going to get an understanding of DevExtreme and the power that it can deliver. So what is DevExtreme? Well, in a nutshell, it's the HTML JavaScript framework that we've provided that's comprised of Phone.js and Chart.js, and then Visual Studio wrappers, wizards, and interfaces to make your life easier as a developer. The whole scope of DevExtreme is way beyond what we're going to cover today because it's really quite a powerful tool set. For example, Chart.js gives you some amazing data visualization tools such as charting, gauges, mapping, and then you've got Phone.js, which is providing all the different types of widgets that will make your life easier when building out your application using DevExtreme. You can see from this screenshot here that we've got standard controls such as navigation, nav bars, pivots, toolbars, there's button sheets, action sheets, toast pop-ups, and the list is quite extensive and continues to grow. One of the amazing things with DevExtreme is the depth and width of what it can do. For example, we support the last 3 major versions of Visual Studio. You can develop for all major mobile platforms. We support all the standard desktop browsers as well as the integrated mobile browsers. When you build an application with DevExtreme, you end up with a native looking user interface. So what we're seeing here is the tip calculator that we ship inside as a demo with DevExtreme, and the same piece of code can be run natively. The same piece of code will look like a native application on each device. So you don't have to worry about how it's going to look on a Windows phone or an Android phone or an iOS phone. Style sheets, etc., take care of all that for you. Now, I talked about the fact that we won't use the word convert, we'll say create, using the iOS version as a frame, a new application. And there's 3 key points to this. You've got the actual user interface itself, you've got the code, and then there's the requirement for the provisioning and distribution. And we'll step through each of those. But first of all, let's just take a look at what the application is that we're going to build today. Now, everyone should have seen a label like this at some point. It's on most food packaging, it's available in fast food restaurants and the like. And effectively what it's telling us is key information about the food that we're purchasing. On one side we can see it's based on kilojoules and fats, the other is calories and fats, but it gives us the same information. Now, a lot of people that are health conscious like to make sure that they're not putting too many kilojoules or calories in their body at a time. About 4 years ago, an application was written that allows you to take that information and apply a formula to it and come up with a food unit. And the idea was that if you, for example, an average male, kept under 20 food units in a day, then you'd sustain a healthy type of lifestyle. You're not going to start adding extra weight where you don't want it. So the iOS application was developed that allowed you from your phone to quickly enter energy and fats, either in kilojoules, calories, saturated fats, or full fats, and it would produce these units for you. So what we're going to do is take that application and apply it into DevExtreme, ready for a shipping to the major app stores. Now the user interface itself, while it's quite simple, it has a couple of text inputs, it has some slider controls and the button panel, provided a little bit of a challenge, because unlike a traditional text field that would pop up the native keyboard, we wanted to have it so that the buttons would interact. That in itself became a challenge because, as you can imagine, there's two text fields, so we had to keep track of which one was active. And we'll be stepping through exactly how that was achieved. Now there's three parts to the building the application, as I said. We've got the actual code, and we've got access to the Objective-C that was used. We're not going to be studying it any length, but it's there if we want to take a look. We've got the UI element, which we looked at before, so we've got something to base our design on. And then there's the provisioning side of it. And depending on which store we want to submit our application to as to the process. Now the major stores, being Apple, Microsoft, and Google, all have developer programs that you have to become a member of. They all have a fee, and then they all take a percentage of any money that you make. While they've got that in common, they also have the provisioning process is very similar. We can see from this screenshot, inside the Apple website, we can create what's known as a provisioning profile, and I'll be stepping through inside Visual Studio where this can be used and how DevExtreme can actually make it easier for you to apply. Exactly the same thing applies for the Google Play. So you become a registered Android developer, you can go to the developer console and set up your provisioning profile. You can see they all vary slightly in visual style, but they capture the same information. And then finally, we've got the exact same thing for Windows Phone. Now, Windows Phone is probably one of the easier ones to submit, because once you've got your publishing information, you don't have to worry about secure certificates and creating the extra aspect. But one of the things, again, that DevExtreme can help you with is creating those private certificates and bundling all that together, ready for that distribution. And we'll take a look at that shortly as well. So what I'm going to do now is switch over to Visual Studio and actually create a new project for DevExtreme. In the background, so that we can reference it if we need to, I've just got a screenshot of the original iOS application. And inside Notepad, I've got the Objective-C, which features things such as the calculation and some of the other bits that were done in the native language for iOS developers. If I'm converting an application like this, then I'd find it handy to actually paste some of the native code in as I do the conversion, but it's certainly not required for today. Now, to make sure that everybody or that nobody dies from boredom from me typing code, I will be pasting different bits and pieces into this presentation. We will be making the entire application available to everybody afterwards, so you don't need to be too concerned that I don't go through every line of code or that I bring snippets in, because the idea is to show you through what DevExtreme's capable of and how easily we can take the likes of this application and make it available across those other stores. After you've installed DevExtreme, you do File, New Project, and inside the Templates area, you're going to see DevExtreme. You'll notice there's two entries for basic application, which I'll come back to. There's a multi-channel application, and then some OData service wizards, one in Visual Basic, one in C#. Now the multi-channel application allows you to target more than one device at a time, and I don't mean operating system. I'm talking about being able to deliver a desktop experience, a tablet experience, and a mobile phone experience within the one project. The OData Service Wizard will allow you to build some nice WCF services that can communicate with your database and your DevExtreme project. Again, given the time that we've allocated for today, we're not going to go into those items in any detail, but there are plenty of webinar or previous webinars and tutorials on our YouTube channel if you wanted to look into that a little further. One of the things that I wanted to target was the use of TypeScript. So I'm just going to create this project while we'll talk you through that. I'll call it FC3 and click OK. Now TypeScript obviously was released recently in Update 2 for Visual Studio 2013. And there's some benefits of using TypeScript over traditional JavaScript. First of all, it's strongly typed, so it's going to help reducing errors inside your code when you build it or when you're coding it. And it's also got built-in support for modules, and it allows C# style coding or syntax, so that it's an easier transition for traditional .NET developers. Now, the other cool thing which we'll see more of today is the integration of IntelliSense within the IDE. So in general, it provides a better tooling and the type safety for a .NET developer to transition into this sort of application. Now, I'll close these windows for a second and we'll take a look at what Visual Studio has available for us inside this solution. So here's the project. We've got some standard folders that are being created. So we've got the CSS. Now this is where that native look and feel is delivered from within the framework. You can see there's a CSS file for each of the core operating systems. We've got some boilerplate code that's been written for hooking into databases. We've got our JavaScript libraries, including jQuery 1 and 2 and Knockout. There's some folder placeholders which are used in the multi-channel type scenario. And then we've got the TypeScript folder, which holds the TypeScript definitions for those pre-mentioned JS files. And then finally we have our views folder, which is where we're going to be working inside for today, and then some basic files for setting up the application. What I'm going to do before I touch any code is just run this inside Internet Explorer and see what it produces. So in the background, the TypeScript compiler is now producing the native or the raw JavaScript from what's been built, and we get presented with the mobile device simulator. You'll see on the top of the screen I can quickly toggle. I'm currently looking at an iPhone, so I can toggle between iOS 6 and then if I want to switch back to iOS 7. We can also see down the left-hand side I can jump between an iPhone and Android, and also things like the Windows Phone 8, and we've also got support for Tizen. Now you'll notice each time that I move through one of these simulators that the layout is made to look and feel like that native device. So this is DevExtreme doing all the work in the background. You'll also see here we're running a tab application. So I've got my home tab, I can switch to the about tab, and it's going to bring that second page up. So it's set up a little bit of boilerplating or some template information for us to work with. Let's just close that. So the first thing I want to change is going to be inside the app.config. So this is where that first part of the navigation is set up. I'm going to keep it nice and simple, just keep the two tabs, but I'm going to change this first one. And from home, I'm going to call it calc. And instead of using the home icon, it's more apt to use the food icon that's built in. I can close that. Now the core of DevExtreme is these DXView files. If I double click on this, you'll notice that on the left hand panel we've got a real-time, what you see is what you get, preview of the HTML that's on the right hand side. Now while it's a .dxview file, it is still just HTML. Shrink this panel out of the way, and you'll see we've got a div that's then pointing to some of the frameworks. So we've got a DXView, we've then got the home view inside this class. As you'd expect, if I modify this code here and then tell it to synchronize the view on the left, we're going to see the word hello appear in the view. So what I'm expecting to see as I go through this is that HTML feeding back to that preview window. I'm going to intro just a couple of divs to start with to show you how easy it is to use the widgets and things from DevExtreme, and then I'll bring the rest of the UI in to save you watching me type. So I'm going to remove these paragraph tags, and I'm going to insert a div. So before I do that, I'm going to bring some class information or some CSS across. You'll notice that I've got this home.css file, which is the home. It is the home view we're working with, and here's all the CSS that we want to work with. I've taken the liberty of going through and just setting up some styling for my divs, etc., so I don't have to sit here and type it all out. But effectively, it's just standard CSS. There's nothing magical or special about it. Back to the View tab. I have my div, and now if I was to grab a text box, I can drag it straight from the toolbox and drop it on here. I've now got a DX text box. We can see it gets rendered onto the screen, and away we go. So inside here I can set some properties. In our case, we might want something like the read-only attribute, and you can see that IntelliSense kicking in and allowing me to do things. So instead of false, I might set my read-only to true. I'm going to be using the knockout binding method today. So I want to update the value property, and I want to bind that. Instead of being an absolute, I want to bind it to a property in my code called energy, for example. And I also want to set a placeholder and call this one energy. If I look at my view now, I've now got a nice placeholder and everything's ready. If I was to apply the class to my div tag, we'll call this one a value row. I'd expect on the left to update. We'll see that in a second, it'll come through. Now, from the toolbox, next thing that I want to do is I want to have maybe the slider control or the tab control popping up next to my toolbox, my text box. So I can bring that through. Refresh, we're going to see this tab control. It supports nice things like graphical elements. So if I wanted to remove those because I don't want pictures in there, I can simply remove the icon property. And again, we'll do that from the about one. And in our case, we'd want to do something like kilojoules and calories. So then we'd see the text update on the side here. Now, the interesting thing with this particular layout, there's not a great deal to it. We've got a couple of input boxes and then we've got those buttons. So I'm going to now paste the markup from clipboard across into that file. Let's take this and paste. So taking a look, what I can do here is actually drag this window off to the left a little bit, move it out of the way, and make sure that my CSS file is happy, everything is good there. So we've now got the text box, we've got the tab controls, and we've got a label. So if we think back to that layout that we saw before, We've got a couple of inputs, slider control, label, and then we're going to have the keyboard input. Now the keyboard input uses a table layout and is doing something straight to the DXClick event. Now the DXClick event is part of the DevExtreme framework and is faster than using the underlying event handlers. So you actually get a better performance using the internal framework calls. We scroll down, we can see that each of the buttons there have been added in. We've got a button for the full stop and also one for a less than for a delete button, for example. So there's certainly nothing super technical going on at that point. Now, next what we want to do is actually start having a look at what the TypeScript would be behind the scenes. So one of the things I was saying that is really nice with TypeScript is the fact that it's built in IntelliSense. Here we've got the TypeScript sitting behind inside the home.typescript file. I've got some of the functions built out. I'll step through those. But if I was to create a new property, for example, we'll call it sample. If I wanted to add something like a knockout observable, as I start typing, we're going to see that TypeScript, the IntelliSense and TypeScript make it really easy to get to grips with the language and the syntax behind it. And being a strongly typed language, it's going to pick up a lot of errors earlier than inside a JavaScript console. So taking a little look at what we're doing at this point, we've got our energy and fat properties which are bound to our text box. If we have a look on our text box, we can see that we have the value is bound to energy and the value is bound to fat. We've got some other methods being called. So switch back to TypeScript. We can see that we've got the change active. Now the change active is one of those things where if you're new to JavaScript, TypeScript/JavaScript, it can trip you up. And it's an interesting thing to try, I suppose, explain, but the function itself has to return a function, not the value. So when you're stepping through this code or you're looking at it, you might find it a little bit strange or daunting to begin with, that here we've got this function that takes in a value but returns a new function. And from anybody coming from a straight .NET background and new into this, it is one of those little things that you might get tripped up on along the way. The other thing that you will notice a lot of when dealing inside TypeScript or JavaScript is things like the triple equal sign. I'm just trying to find an example for you now. So here we're doing a comparison, and you're used to using a double equals, but being an object language, to make sure that you're comparing the right types, triple equal is required. And you'll find if I was to set that to double equals and run it, I might get some behavior that I'm not quite expecting. So there's nothing complex inside this particular code. I picked a really nice simple example to step through. The click handler, which is the code behind the button, simply takes the text property from the table element and then runs through the switch case to do something. So we can clear the values. These are bound to the knockout binding, so it's going to update what's happening on screen. In fact, what we'll do now is just run it and see what it looks like in the flesh inside later. Just wait for Internet Explorer to start up. And we can see that without doing too much, we've got an interface that looks quite similar to the original iOS one. We've got our placeholders sitting inside our text boxes. We've got our slider controls that allow me to switch between. I can click on energy and type in maybe 1 kilojoule and 0.1 gram of fat and click calc. And you'll see that I get my value coming up in the label. And we've also got this nice little toast notification happening. So now I'm going to backspace that and say 400. say calc, and we've got a different thing popping up. The framework allows, if we switch to, say, the Windows Phone 8 version, so now I'm sitting on a Windows phone where I can slide my finger across the screen to get the full rich experience. I'll put 200 kilojoules with 0.4 fat and calc, and the toast notifications are appearing at the top. One of the really nice things inside the widgets that's provided by the DevExtreme framework is interaction with things like the toast notifications. So if we just scroll down here for a second, we'll see that, let's expand the calc function method, which is the actual code that's doing that calculation. All that we're really interested in here is that we've got a result, and that we can run a switch case, a switch statement over that result to say, if it's 0, show a message. Now this show message is just a method that I created, and inside this function it's calling the DevExpress UI notify event. Again, with that beautiful IntelliSense DevExpress, press the right key, it works, dot, and then UI. And you can see that having that support for TypeScript really does make a difference when you're stepping through inside the IDE. Being able to do things that look native on the device is really quite nice. So by calling just this notify method, passing in a message and a type, and then the length of time that I want to display, depending on the device that I run, it will look like a native toast notification. Now, given that there's no complex code behind this one, the markup is straight HTML, or what we'd be used to seeing inside most web pages, what's actually involved in making this available for some of the stores? Well, the first step to look at is to actually right-click on the project and come down to the properties. And you'll notice inside the project we've got some extra tabs. First thing I could do here is set my version information, and then in our case we're dealing only with the portrait application. If I come down to the next tab of debug, I can change how the application is going to appear inside the simulator. Now, if I was building an application that I want to interact with the hardware level, which is something that the DevExtreme framework will allow you to do quite easily, I can simply tick the capabilities I want, and then when DevExtreme is compiled, or the framework is compiled, it will write the necessary settings files out for you. So if I wanted to interact with the geolocation or the camera, it will write all the requirements so that the framework knows and tells the hardware extraction layer, hey, we want to do this. But the ones that I'm really interested in right now are these package tabs. So if I'm building for an Android package, the first thing I'd need to do would be specify my certificate file. Because I don't have one right now, I'm going to skip that. There is a step inside the build wizard that allows me to make that transition really quite easy. When you're submitting to any of the application stores, it's imperative that you have the correct artwork. And that's everything from the necessary icon files and sizes to some launch images. And in the likes of the iOS package, that can mean there's quite a lot of artwork to fill in. So here I'd select that I only want to target an iPhone, so that tells the binary when it's run. Don't allow it to be run on anything but an iPhone, or run as an iPhone app even on an iPad. And then I get to specify the different icons, etc. Now obviously if you're targeting iOS, Apple have started to make it more interesting or more difficult in some respects because of the different models that they're releasing. So you have to support the low res, you've got to support the Retina, you then have to support the 3.5-inch iPhone versus the 4-inch iPhone. You've then got different artwork for iOS 6 and iOS 7. So there's some interesting things to think about in respect to that. One of the really cool things, of course, being a HTML-based framework, is you can use styles to get around some of the screen resizing, which can work really nicely. We then also have the settings of the Windows Phone package. And I find that it's probably one of the easiest ones to publish for, because there's not a lot of extra requirements once you've filled in your details inside the Windows Developer Portal. So once we've set up all the different artwork at this level, let's close this. We can come back to here, right click for the context menu, and this time I'm going to choose Build Native Packages. At this point we're going to see this little wizard pop up. If I was targeting just PhoneGap and wanted a package zip file, I could choose this. The ties and support that's been added would be here. But the ones that I'm really interested in are the three mainstream vendors at the moment. That's Android, iOS, and Windows Phone. Now when I come into each of these sub-wizards, here again it's saying, hey, you need a certificate file. When it came to developing for iOS for quite a long time, you had to have a Mac to create your provisioning profile and do certain aspects of it. The beauty with DevExtreme is that's not required. Using this type of wizard, we can create a new certificate on the fly. So you come through, populate all the relevant details based on your developer information with the necessary store. Here we've provided shortcuts to take you straight to that website, and you choose generate, and that would create the certificate file for you. Exactly the same process for iOS. Here you can see I've already set my folders up to the right place, and I could put my password in, or I could create a new certificate, and it's asking for the details that would be stored on my iOS developer account. At that point you can press build. We'll do that with a Windows Phone. What's happening now is it's going through, compiling the binaries, making sure that everything's correct, and then we're going to see that the actual package is created. You'll notice at this level that we're seeing some warnings within the file. It's telling me, hey, you've got some critical resources that are missing. In this case, the application icons, the background, splash screen, etc. But it still managed to create the XAP file. And at this point, I could browse the result and just upload it straight to my Windows Phone developer page, ready for submission into the Microsoft Store. I'd get to repeat that process for as many different outputs as I wanted, whether it be Android, iOS, Windows Phone, everything down to Tizen and PhoneGap. So stepping through that whole process, once you've registered as a developer for those stores, is a real simple process. You get to code either directly in JavaScript, or you can use the Typescript support if you're running Visual Studio 2013 with Update 2. If you're running other versions, you can install Typescript using the package manager inside there as well. And there is so much that is available from within the toolbox inside the DXView file. Switch back to that. As far as widgets and other things are available. And there's been some amazing applications written by developers around the world using DevExtreme that have been listed inside the top 10 on things like the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store.
And that is it. So thank you to Paul for presenting, and thank you all for joining us. Just a reminder, when you exit this webinar, you will see a short survey, one question. Please take a second to comment. We do truly appreciate it. And thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.